Dr. Marcus Webb pressed his face against the small window of the transport ship. Outside, the research station looked like a giant metal flower floating in space. Its long arms stretched out in all directions, catching the light from the nearby star. This was Harmony's Edge, the most important research station in this part of the galaxy. Marcus felt his stomach twist with nerves. He had spent 15 years studying alien minds and behavior, but this was different. This was the first time humans had been invited to join the Galactic Academic Council. If he failed here, it might be decades before humans got another chance. Transport ship docked with a soft bump. Marcus grabbed his bag and walked toward the airlock. The doors slid open with a quiet hiss, and he stepped into the station. The first thing that hit him was the smell. It was clean and metallic, but with something else mixed in. Something that reminded him of flowers after rain. The gravity felt a little lighter than Earth normal, making each step feel bouncy. A tall figure approached him from across the wide hallway. Marcus had seen pictures of Zephyrians before, but seeing one in person was still amazing. Professor Kethfer stood nearly. 8 feet tall, with skin that looked like it was made of blue crystal. 4 arms moved with perfect grace as he walked. His face was long and narrow, with large silver eyes that seemed to glow with their own light. "Dr. Webb," Professor Kethfer said. His voice was like music, with notes that went up and down in ways human voices could not. "Welcome to Harmony's Edge. I am honored to meet you." Marcus tried not to stare at the alien's 4 arms as they all moved in different directions. 2 were folded behind his back. 1 gestured as he spoke, and the 4th held a small device that glowed softly. "Thank you for having me, Professor," Marcus said. "I'm excited to be here." "Excitement," Professor Kethfer repeated the word slowly, as if tasting it. "Yes, I can sense that energy in you. Very human. Come, let me show you to your quarters, and then we will meet the others." They walked through corridors that curved and twisted in impossible ways. The walls were covered with patterns that seemed to move when Marcus wasn't looking directly at them. Other aliens passed by, some Marcus recognized from his studies, others completely new to him. "Tell me, Dr. Webb," Professor Kethfer said as they walked, "what do you know about patience?" Marcus thought for a moment. "Well, I suppose it's the ability to wait for something without getting frustrated. To take your time with difficult problems." "Interesting," the professor said. "My people believe that patience is the highest virtue in the universe. We think that all good things come to those who wait, who think carefully, who never rush." They stopped at a door that slid open when Professor Kethfer touched it with one of his 4 hands. Inside was a small but comfortable room with a bed, desk, and viewing window that looked out at the gas giant below. "Rest for 1 hour," Professor Kethfer said. "Then we will meet in the Great Hall. You will see the Grand Challenge and meet your fellow participants." After the professor left, Marcus sat on the bed and looked out the window. The gas giant below swirled with colors he had no names for. Storms the size of planets moved across its surface like slow dancers. He thought about what Professor Kethfer had said about patience. Marcus knew he wasn't the most patient person. Back on Earth, his colleagues often joked that he could solve problems faster than anyone, but only because he hated waiting around. An hour later, Marcus made his way to the Great Hall. The room was enormous, with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above. In the center was a raised platform where dozens of beings sat at individual workstations. "Marcus," a familiar voice called out. He turned to see Dr. Lisa Grant waving at him from across the room. Marcus felt relief wash over him. Lisa was a brilliant mathematician from MIT, and seeing a familiar human face made him feel less alone. He walked over to where Lisa sat with another human, a broad-shouldered man with graying hair and serious eyes. "Marcus, meet Commander Jake Foster," Lisa sighed. He used to be military, but now he's working on strategy and game theory. Jake stood and shook Marcus's hand with a firm grip. Good to meet you, Doc. Lisa's been telling me about your work with alien psychology. We're going to need all the help we can get. How long have you two been here? Marcus asked. 3 weeks for me, Lisa said, pointing to a pile of notes on her desk. Jake got here 2 weeks ago. We've been working on something called the Grand Challenge. What exactly is it? Marcus asked. Jake pointed to the workstations around them. Each species that wants to join the Galactic Academic Council has to solve this puzzle. It has exactly 1,000 steps, and you have to do them in order. Skip a step or get one wrong, and you start over from the beginning. Marcus looked around the hall. He saw beings he recognized from his studies. The Centaurians looked like walking trees with too many branches. They moved very slowly and seemed to think about every tiny movement before making it. The Vorthans were short and round, with huge heads full of what looked like computer circuits. They worked with perfect focus, never looking up from their screens. How many steps have you completed? Marcus asked Lisa. 200, she said, looking tired. It took me 3 weeks to get this far. Each step builds on the previous ones, and the math gets more complex as you go. Jake's at 150. Professor Cuthfer appeared beside them as if he had materialized from thin air. Dr. Webb, are you ready to begin your grand challenge? Marcus nodded, though his stomach felt full of butterflies. The professor led him to an empty workstation. A large holographic display came to life, showing complex mathematical symbols, geometric shapes, and flowing diagrams that moved like living things. Numbers and equations floated in the air, connected by lines of light. This puzzle has been given to every species seeking to join our council for over 1,000 years, Professor Cuthfer explained. It tests not just intelligence, but patience, dedication, and the ability to work methodically toward a distant goal. Marcus stared at the display. The first step looked simple enough, but he could see how the complexity would grow with each level. Some species take months to complete it, the professor continued. Others take years. The record is held by the Zephyrians, naturally. We completed it in just 18 months. 18 months? Marcus said, unable to hide his surprised out professor. Cuthfer's silver eyes seemed to glow brighter. Patience, Dr. Webb. Good things cannot be rushed. The journey is as important as the destination. Each step must be savored, understood completely, before moving to the next. Marcus nodded politely, but inside he was thinking that 18 months seemed like an awfully long time to solve any puzzle, no matter how complex. Begin when you are ready, Professor Cuthfer said. There is no time limit. Take as long as you need. As the professor walked away, Marcus looked at the first step of the puzzle. It was a relatively simple mathematical relationship, but he could see how it would connect to more complex problems later. He picked up the stylus and began to work around him. The great hall was quiet, except for the soft sounds of aliens working. At their stations, everyone moved slowly and carefully, treating each step like it was the most important thing in the universe. Marcus completed the first step and moved to the second, then the third. As he worked, part of his mind began to wonder about the bigger picture. What was this puzzle really testing? And why did it need to be exactly 1,000 steps? But for now, he pushed those thoughts aside and focused on the task at hand. Step by step, just like everyone else. Marcus spent his first week at the station, settling into a routine. Every morning, he would eat breakfast in the cafeteria with Lisa and Jake, then spend 8 hours working on the puzzle. The food was strange, but edible, a mix of human favorites and alien dishes that tasted like nothing he had ever experienced. The puzzle was unlike anything Marcus had seen before. Each step required him to solve a mathematical problem, recognize a pattern, or make a logical connection. The holographic display would show him symbols, numbers, and shapes that moved and changed as he worked. When he completed a step correctly, new information would appear. Building on what came before, by the end of his first week, Marcus had completed 25 steps. He felt proud of his progress until he talked to the other participants. 25 steps in a week? Said Velther, a centaurian whose bark-like skin rustled when he spoke. That seems quite fast. I completed 7 steps in my first week, and I was pleased with that pace. Marcus looked around the great hall at the other beings working on their puzzles. The centaurians moved like everything was underwater, taking hours to complete calculations that Marcus could do in minutes. The Vorthans worked with mechanical precision, checking and double-checking every answer before moving forward. Even the other humans were moving more slowly than Marcus felt comfortable with. Lisa showed him her notebook, filled with detailed drawings and explanations for each step. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a page covered with diagrams. Step 47 has 3 different ways to solve it. I spent 2 days making sure. I understood all of them before moving on. Jake nodded in agreement. Back in the military, we had a saying, "Slow is smooth, and smooth is fast." If you rush through something important, you'll just have to do it again later. Marcus understood their point, but something about the puzzle bothered him. He couldn't put his finger on what it was, but the whole thing felt familiar in a way that made him uncomfortable. Professor Kethfer visited the Great Hall every day, walking between the workstations and offering quiet encouragement. He always spent extra time with Marcus, watching him work with those glowing silver eyes. "You are progressing quite rapidly, Dr. Webb," the professor said one morning. "Perhaps too rapidly. The greatest minds in the galaxy have learned that this puzzle rewards patience above all else." "I understand, Professor," Marcus said, "but the steps seem straightforward enough. Why should I spend more time on them than necessary?" "Professor." Kethfer's forearms moved in. What Marcus had learned was a gesture of concern. "Because each step contains wisdom that can only be absorbed through careful contemplation. You humans seem to believe that faster is always better. But some things cannot be rushed." Marcus nodded politely, but privately he disagreed. In his experience, human minds were good at finding shortcuts and seeing patterns quickly. It was one of the things that made humans successful as a species. Over the next few days, Marcus tried to slow down his work to match the pace of the others. He spent more time on each step, double-checking his answers and making detailed notes like Lisa did. But his mind kept wandering to bigger questions about the puzzle itself. On step 63, something clicked in Marcus's brain. The mathematical relationship he was solving looked familiar. Not just similar to previous steps, but exactly like something he had seen before. He flipped through his notes, searching for the connection. There it was, back in step 12. The numbers were different, but the underlying pattern was identical. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. He started looking through more of his completed steps, searching for other repeated patterns. "What are you working on?" Lisa asked, leaning over to look at his notes. "I think I'm seeing some repetition in the puzzle structure," Marcus said. "Look at this." He showed her the similarities between steps 12 and 63, then pointed out how step 37 was almost identical to step 5, just with larger numbers. Lisa frowned. "That's interesting, but it might just be coincidence. Complex mathematical systems often have similar elements." "Maybe," Marcus said, but he wasn't convinced. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in his small room, staring out at the gas giant below, thinking about patterns and repetition. His brain was wired to look for shortcuts and connections. It was what made him good at understanding alien psychology. He would notice small behavioral patterns that others missed, then use those patterns to understand how alien minds worked. The next morning, Marcus decided to test his theory. Instead of working on step 71 like he was supposed to, he skipped ahead to step 120. If his pattern theory was correct, this step should be similar to step 20, just more complex. He was right. Step 120 was almost exactly like step 20, but with additional variables and more complex mathematics. Marcus felt excitement building in his chest. He quickly worked through the step, then jumped ahead to step 170. Again, the pattern held. Step 170 matched step 70, with the same underlying structure but greater complexity. "Marcus, what are you doing?" Jake's voice interrupted his thoughts. Marcus looked up to see Jake and Lisa standing beside his workstation, both looking concerned. "You're supposed to be on step 71, Lisa said. "The display shows you're working on step 170. Did you skip ahead?" "I think I found something," Marcus said excitedly. "The puzzle has patterns. The steps repeat themselves with variations. Look at this." He showed them his analysis, explaining how steps seem to cycle through similar structures. Every 50 or 100 steps. Jake listened with the focused attention of a military strategist, while Lisa looked skeptical. "Even if you're right," Lisa said, "you're not supposed to skip steps. Professor Kethfer said the steps have to be completed in order." "But what if that's not actually necessary?" Marcus asked. "What if the real test is recognizing the patterns, not grinding through every single step?" Before either of his friends could answer, Professor Kethfer appeared beside their workstation. His forearms moved in what Marcus now recognized as agitation. "Dr. Webb," the professor said, his musical voice carrying a note of disappointment. "I see you have not been following the proper sequence. You cannot simply skip ahead in the grand challenge." "Professor, I think I might have discovered something important about the puzzle structure," Marcus said. "There is nothing to discover, except patience and dedication," Professor Kethfer replied firmly. "Please return to the proper sequence. Complete each step in order, as it was designed." Marcus wanted to argue, but he could see that the professor was not interested in hearing about patterns or shortcuts. Around the great hall, other participants had stopped their work to watch the conversation. The Centaurians rustled their bark-like skin in what Marcus thought might be disapproval. "Of course, Professor," Marcus said finally. "I'll go back to the proper sequence." Professor Kethfer's silver eyes studied Marcus for a long moment. "Good. Remember, Dr. Webb, the path to wisdom cannot be shortened. Every step matters." After the professor left, Marcus reset his display to step 71, but his mind was racing with possibilities. He was becoming more certain that the puzzle was not what it appeared to be. The patterns he was seeing were too regular, too systematic to be coincidence. "Maybe you should just follow the rules," Lisa said quietly. "We're representing all of humanity here. If you cause problems, it could hurt our chances of joining the council." Marcus nodded, but privately he had already made up his mind. He would continue working through the steps in order during the day when others could see him. But at night, in his room, he would continue mapping the patterns he had discovered. That evening, Marcus sat at his small desk with a notebook, sketching out the relationships between different steps. The more he analyzed the puzzle, the more convinced he became that it was not actually 1,000 unique steps. It was something else entirely. Disguised as a test of patience and endurance, he thought about the professor's words about wisdom and patience. Marcus respected those qualities, but he also believed that intelligence meant seeing solutions that others missed. If he was right about the puzzle's true nature, then the real test was not patience at all. It was the ability to think differently. Marcus smiled to himself as he continued his secret analysis. Tomorrow, he would keep pretending to work slowly and methodically. But tonight, he would uncover the truth about the grand challenge. Outside his window, the gas giant continued its slow dance through space, storms the size of worlds spinning, in patterns that had remained unchanged for millions of years. But Marcus wasn't interested in slow, patient observation anymore. He was interested in finding the shortcut that would change everything. 3 weeks had passed since Marcus arrived at Harmony's Edge. During the day, he worked steadily through the puzzle steps, keeping pace with the other participants. He had reached step 115, which put him ahead of most aliens. But behind Lisa, who was now at step 230. But it was his nighttime work that excited Marcus most. Every evening, he would return to his room and continue mapping the patterns hidden within the grand challenge. His notebook was now filled with diagrams, charts, and calculations that revealed the puzzle's secret structure. The breakthrough came. On a Tuesday night, Marcus was analyzing the mathematical relationships between steps 50 through 100 when he suddenly saw it clearly. The puzzle was not a straight line of 1,000 unique steps. It was a circle. "Oh my God," Marcus whispered to himself, staring at his notebook. The pattern was so obvious now that he wondered how he had missed it before. The puzzle consisted of exactly 100 base steps that repeated 10 times. Each repetition added more complexity and harder mathematics, but the underlying logical structure remained the same. Step 1 was fundamentally identical to step 101, which was identical to step 201, and so on. Marcus felt his heart racing as he realized what this meant. If he could solve the base pattern of 100 steps, he could predict every step in the entire puzzle. He wouldn't need to work through all 1,000 steps individually. He could jump to the end. The next morning, Marcus sat in the cafeteria with Lisa and Jake, trying to act normal while his mind buzzed with excitement. "You look like you haven't slept," Lisa said, studying his face with concern. "I've been thinking about the puzzle," Marcus said, which was true enough. Jake pushed his plate of strange alien fruit aside and leaned forward. "I've been thinking about it too. Something bothers me about the whole setup. Back in the military, when we designed training exercises, there was always a clear purpose. This puzzle feels different." "Different how?" Lisa asked. "It's too long," Jake said. 1,000 steps to test someone's abilities? That's not testing intelligence or even patience. That's testing endurance. It's like making someone run a marathon to prove they can walk." Marcus felt a surge of excitement. Jake was seeing the same problems with the puzzle that Marcus had noticed. "What do you think the real purpose is?" "I don't know," Jake admitted, "but I don't think it's what Professor Kethver says it is." Lisa looked uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Maybe we should just focus on completing the challenge. We're here to represent humanity, not to question the Galactic Academic Council's methods." "But what if questioning their methods is exactly what we should be doing?" Marcus asked. "What if humans are supposed to approach this differently than the other species?" Before Lisa could respond, a commotion erupted from across the cafeteria. A Vorthan was making high-pitched beeping sounds that Marcus had learned meant distress. 2 Centaurians were rustling their bark-like skin, which was their version of excited conversation. "What's happening?" Jake asked. They walked over to where a crowd was gathering around one of the information displays. The screen showed updated progress reports for all the Grand Challenge participants. At the top of the list was a name Marcus didn't recognize: Zethkal of the Andromedans. The number next to the name read 847. 847 steps, Lisa breathed. In just 6 months. Marcus looked at the rest of the list. Most participants were between step 50 and step 300. The Centaurians averaged around step 100 after working for over a year. Even the fastest Zephyrian was only at step 600 after 18 months of work. "How is that possible?" asked Velther, the Centaurian Marcus had spoken with. During his first week, the Andromedans are known for their computational abilities, explained to Vorthan, whose name Marcus couldn't pronounce. They can process mathematical relationships much faster than most species. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. If the Andromedans were naturally faster at computation, and one of them was at step 847, what did that say about his theory? Maybe the puzzle really was just a test of raw processing power and endurance. But as Marcus thought about it more, he realized something important. Even if Zethkal was incredibly fast at mathematics, reaching step 847 in 6 months meant completing about 4.5 steps per day. That was impressive, but not impossible for a human working at full speed. The real question was, why was Zethkal working so fast? Did the Andromedans see something in the puzzle that the other species missed? That afternoon, Marcus made a decision that would either prove his theory or get him removed from the program. Instead of working on his assigned step, he opened a private calculation window on his workstation and began testing his pattern theory systematically. He started with step 101, which should be identical to step 1 according to his analysis. Using his base pattern formulas, he predicted what the answer should be. Then he navigated to that step in the puzzle and checked if his prediction was correct. Not it was. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. He tried step 201, then step 301. Each time, his formula predicted the correct answer. The pattern was real, and it was consistent. "Marcus, what are you doing?" Lisa's voice made him jump. He looked up to see Lisa and Jake standing beside his workstation. Both looked confused and worried. "I'm testing my pattern theory," Marcus said quietly, "and it's working. The puzzle really is a loop." Jake's eyes widened. "You mean you can predict the answers without solving each step?" "Not just predict," Marcus said. "I can solve any step in the entire puzzle using my base pattern formulas. Watch this." He showed them how his analysis worked, demonstrating with several random steps throughout the puzzle. Each time, his formula gave the correct answer without requiring him to work through all the previous steps. Lisa stared at the display in shock. "This is impossible. You're saying the entire grand challenge is just the same 100 steps repeated 10 times? "With increasing complexity, yes," Marcus said. "The mathematical operations get harder, but the logical structure stays the same. But why would they design it this way?" Jake asked. Marcus had been thinking about that question for days. "I think it's a test, but not the kind of test they think it is. Every species that takes this challenge approaches it the same way, step by step, slowly and carefully. But what if the real test is figuring out that you don't have to do that?" "You mean it's testing whether we're smart enough to find the shortcut?" Jake said, "Exactly. Think about it from an evolutionary perspective. Humans are good at pattern recognition and finding efficient solutions. We're not the strongest species or the most patient, but we're excellent at thinking outside the box." Lisa looked around the great hall nervously. "But what if you're wrong? What if this is really just a test of patience and dedication, like Professor Kethver says?" "Then I'll fail," Marcus said simply. "But I don't think I'm wrong." As they talked, Marcus noticed movement from across the hall. Professor Kethver was walking toward their workstation, his forearms moving in what Marcus now recognized as curiosity mixed with concern. "Dr. Webb," the professor said as he approached, "I noticed you have been accessing steps outside your current sequence again. May I ask why?" Marcus felt his mouth go dry. This was the moment of truth. He could lie and say it was an accident, or he could tell Professor Kethver about his discovery and risk everything. "Professor, I believe I've found something important." "About the puzzle," Marcus said. "I think it's designed to test pattern recognition, not just patience." Professor Kethver's silver eyes seemed to glow brighter. "What do you mean?" Marcus took a deep breath and began explaining his analysis. He showed the professor his notebook with all the patterns he had mapped, demonstrated how his formulas could predict any step in the sequence, and explained his theory about the puzzle. Being a loop rather than a linear progression dot, as Marcus talked, a crowd began to gather. Other participants stopped their work to listen. The Centaurians rustled their bark-like skin in what might have been surprise. The Vorthans beeped quietly among themselves. Even some Zephyrians approached, their crystalline faces unreadable. Marcus finished his explanation. The great hall was completely silent. Professor Cuthfer studied the notebook for a long time, his forearms moving through complex gestures that Marcus couldn't interpret. Finally, the professor looked up. "Dr. Webb, these patterns you have identified, they are quite remarkable. But I must ask, do you truly believe this is how the grand challenge is meant to be solved?" Marcus met the professor's silver gaze. "I think it's how humans are meant to solve it." "Maybe that's the point." Professor Cuthfer was quiet for another long moment. Around them, the other participants waited to see what would happen next. "Very well," the professor said finally. "If you are correct about these patterns, then you should be able to demonstrate their validity. Can you use your formulas to solve step 1000? Marcus felt his heart hammering in his chest. This was it, the moment that would prove whether his weeks of secret analysis had been brilliant insight or elaborate self-deception. "Yes," Marcus said. "I believe I can." The great hall had never been so quiet. Every participant had stopped working to watch Marcus as he prepared to demonstrate his theory. Even the Zephyrian observers, who usually moved with calm grace, stood perfectly still. Marcus opened his notebook and spread his pattern charts across the workstation. His hands were shaking slightly, but his mind was clear. He had spent weeks preparing for this moment, even though he hadn't known it would come like this. The final step should follow the same pattern as step 1000, Marcus said, his voice carrying across the silent hall, but with maximum complexity in all variables. He began entering equations into his workstation. The holographic display lit up with flowing mathematics and geometric shapes. Marcus worked steadily, applying his base pattern formulas to predict what step 1000 would require. Professor Cuthfer watched intently, all four of his arms perfectly still. The other Zephyrians whispered among themselves in their musical language, but too quietly for Marcus to understand. "According to my analysis," Marcus said, "step 1000 requires solving a multidimensional matrix equation with 17 variables, followed by a geometric proof involving rotating hypercubes, and finally a logical sequence that maps quantum states to classical outcomes." He entered his predicted solution into the display. The holographic shapes swirled and danced, processing his answers. For a moment that felt like hours, nothing happened. Then the display flashed brilliant green, and words appeared in multiple languages. "Challenge complete, solution verified." The silence in the great hall was deafening. Marcus stared at the display, hardly believing what he was seeing. He had done it. He had solved the grand challenge using his pattern recognition instead of grinding through all 1000 steps. "Impossible," whispered Vel Thur, the Centaurian. His bark-like skin was rustling so violently it sounded like wind through leaves. "The human solved it in 3 weeks, beeped one of the Vorthans. 3 weeks instead of 3 years. Professor Cuthfer stepped forward, his silver eyes brighter than Marcus had ever seen them. "Dr. Webb, please explain exactly how you achieved this result." Marcus felt all eyes in the hall focused on him. He took a deep breath and began explaining his discovery from the beginning. He showed them how he had first noticed repeated patterns around step 63. He demonstrated the mathematical relationships that proved the puzzle was circular rather than linear. He walked them through his formulas that could predict any step based on the base pattern of 100 dot as he talked. Marcus saw different reactions from different species. The Centaurians seemed confused and slightly upset, as if their entire worldview was being challenged. The Vorthans were processing the information with mechanical efficiency, their circuits flashing as they verified his mathematics. The Zephyrians appeared calm on the surface, but Marcus could see subtle signs of agitation in the way their forearms moved. "But this means," said Jake, who had been quietly following the explanation, "that the entire challenge could be solved in a few days instead of years." "If you recognize the pattern, yes," Marcus said. "But only if you're willing to step back and look at the big picture instead of focusing on individual steps." Lisa was staring at her own workstation with a stunned expression. "I've been working on this for a month, and I could have solved it in a week if I had seen what you saw." "But why didn't the other species see it?" asked Commander Jake. "Some of them are much smarter than us. The Vorthans are living computers. The Zephyrians have been studying mathematics for thousands of years." Marcus had been thinking about this question ever since he discovered the pattern. "I think it's because they approached it the way they were supposed to. Every species that takes this challenge treats it like a test of patience and endurance. They're so focused on being methodical and careful that they never step back to see the whole structure." "You are suggesting," said Professor Kethver slowly, "that the methodical approach we value so highly actually prevented us from seeing the truth?" "Not prevented," Marcus said carefully, "but maybe it made it harder. Humans are good at pattern recognition because we're naturally impatient. We're always looking for shortcuts and easier ways to do things. Sometimes that gets us in trouble, but sometimes it lets us see solutions that others miss." One of the Zephyrian observers approached the group. Marcus recognized him as Elder Yethmar, one of the most respected members of the Galactic Academic Council. "Dr. Webb," Elder Yethmar said, his voice carrying harmonics that made Marcus's bones vibrate, "your analysis of the Grand Challenge is most illuminating. But I must ask, if the puzzle can be solved so quickly using your method, what does that say about its value as a test?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "Maybe it says that the test isn't what we thought it was. Maybe it's not testing patience or endurance. Maybe it's testing whether different species can bring their natural strengths to solve problems in new ways. But we have given this challenge to hundreds of species over thousands of years," Elder Yethmar said. "None have ever approached it as you have." "That's exactly my point," Marcus said. "Every species has been told that patience and methodical work are the keys to success. So every species tries to be patient and methodical. But what if some species are naturally better at different approaches?" Marcus looked around the great hall at all the different beings staring at him. "The Centaurians are naturally slow and careful, so they excel at the step-by-step approach. The Vorthans are computational masters, so they can process complex mathematics quickly. But humans are pattern recognition specialists. We see connections and shortcuts that others might miss." "Are you saying," asked Velther, "that there is no single correct way to solve problems?" "I'm saying maybe that's exactly what this test was designed to discover," Marcus replied. "Maybe the Grand Challenge isn't about finding the one right answer. Maybe it's about finding out what each species does best." Elder Yethmar exchanged glances with Professor Kethver and the other Zephyrian observers. They whispered among themselves in their musical language for several minutes while everyone else waited. Finally, Elder Yethmar turned back to Marcus. "Dr. Webb, your theory is interesting, but it raises an important question. If the Grand Challenge can be solved using pattern recognition instead of methodical progression, why did no one discover this before? Are you suggesting that humans are the first species intelligent enough to see the truth?" Marcus felt the weight of the question. The wrong answer could make him sound arrogant and dismissive of other species' intelligence. But he also felt that honesty was important. "No," Marcus said. I think humans might be the first species willing to ignore the instructions. A great hall erupted in surprised sounds from various species. The Centaurians rustled loudly, the Vorthans beeped in rapid sequences, and even the Zephyrians showed visible reactions. "Explain," Elder Yethmar said, his voice cutting through the noise. "Every species that comes here is told that the Grand Challenge tests patience and methodical thinking," Marcus said. "They're told that the greatest minds in the galaxy solve it slowly and carefully. So naturally, every species tries to follow that example. They respect the wisdom of those who came before." Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. "But humans have a different relationship with authority and tradition. We question things, even when we're told not to. We look for shortcuts, even when we're